I'm Alana. I use they and she pronouns.
And I'm Jessie. I use she and her pronouns.
And we're
We're
making
making
mentions.
mentions. Making Mentions is an organization providing radical Jewish education.
And this is the artist series where we showcase queer, Jewish, anti-Zionist artists. Before we start talking to today's amazing guest, we wanted to take some time to acknowledge and grieve for the victims of the Israeli attack on the refugee camp in Jenin.
Though Israel has withdrawn its forces from the refugee camp, at least 13 Palestinians have been killed and over 100 wounded. We'll take a moment of silence to honor them now. We also want to name Israel's clear violation of human rights in Jenin. Palestinians died while Israeli tanks blocked ambulances from reaching wounded people, and the IDF tore up roads and camp infrastructure. There is no way to both sides this moment or write it off as clashes between two groups. This is the result of Israeli settler colonial power being inflicted upon Palestinians and the rightful resistance against that occupying power. We support the liberation of Palestine and liberation for all oppressed people.
And now, grounded in the spirit of liberation work and focusing on joy in times that are so often devoid of joy, we turn to our guest for today. So today we're talking to ZAI. So ZAI, introduce yourself. So pronouns, where you call home, astrological sign if you're into that, and then tell us what kind of art you make.
Hi folks, thank you for having me. My name is ZAI, pronouns he, him. I occasionally fuck with a they, and I'm a Sagittarius. I call New York home, I call Paris home, I call Switzerland home, and I call Germany home. I grew up in all of them, but primarily New York.
Awesome.
I call home.
I didn't know that. That's super cool. Very excited to hear that show up today.
Thank you.
Tell us what kind of art you make.
I'm a musician, I'm a punk rapper, and I'm also a fashion designer. I do bespoke. It's technically considered couture. I do chest plates, basically. And I also dabble in other things, but those are the main two things I'm focusing on in my life right now, artistically.
That's awesome. And we're going to have a conversation that's going to bring in all of your art and identity. And so we wanted to just kick it off and get started. And wherever you go with this question, feel free. How does Judaism show up in your life now? So we'll start there, but you could take us back. You could take us where you want it to go and go wherever.
Yeah, Judaism, it's interesting. I'm one of those people that jokes that I'm Jewish because I'm not very knowledgeable on different parts of the religious aspects, but I appreciate being Jewish because it's the only identity I have that I have not felt necessarily like it's being shaken constantly throughout my life. All that to say, yes, I get questions of, are you really Jewish? Because you're black. Are you really? Like, I get ridiculous questions and I've had ridiculous experiences. But even when I was growing up in Europe, there's been the only part of me that's been constant. Obviously, I'm constantly black. I'm constantly everything. But when I was in Europe, I was the only black person in school for the most part. I was usually the only black person wherever I was. But since I was born until now, I have consistently been in a synagogue. So that's what I mean by the only identity that I feel like. Do you get what I'm saying? I don't know how to explain it really, but that is not to say I feel my blackness 24/7 all my life proudly, and every other identity as well. But it's the only community that I feel like I've been actively, largely involved in my entire life.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I think that the element of community that Judaism provides is something that we're constantly reflecting on in making mentions and just in general when we're talking about Judaism. And I think it's really beautiful. That's felt like a constant community for you.
Yeah, it's like I said, there's definitely been ridiculousness and from within and outside the Jewish community that I've faced, but it, like I said, it's been the main constant for me. So
I think it's really wonderful that despite all of the racism that can exist in Jewish spaces and from outside Jewish spaces, that it's still shown up in a way that feels important and affirming to you. I have a lot of questions in general about like Jewish life in Europe and all of that, because I feel like everyone we've talked to has been solely based in the United States. So that's super fascinating. But that's not what we're here for today, although maybe we'll get into it at some point. But I guess in light of you talking about some of your other identities and the ways that you show up in the world, how do you feel like your identities impact and show up in your art?
Yeah, since I was very young, my identity has been at the forefront of my mind, not really voluntarily. I'm constantly reminded, basically. And so it does affect my art pretty actively. I try to intentionally make everything I do in some way, shape, or form relating to the communities I care about. Like with my brand Beyond the chest plates, it's for trans people. It's for everyone, but it's really initially for trans people who might be dealing with gender dysphoria and chest dysphoria and things of that nature, or who just want to experience gender euphoria. So you can get whatever chest you want, regardless of whatever chest you have. So that was very intentional. And a lot of my music, I just talk about being Black, being New York, being queer, pretty blatantly. I try to keep it at least blatant enough for people within the communities that I'm trying to reach to understand that. I'm not always necessarily like in my song, I'm gay, like I try to keep it pretty visible and pretty unabashed. And that's been that way since I was very little. I used to want to be an actor. I still want to be an actor, but that was like one of the first things I wanted to do creatively. And I remember being like, I want to do it because I want to play more creative Black roles. I'm tired of seeing the same Black roles. That was when I was a kid. So I proudly like to keep it on the forefront of what I do.
That makes a lot of sense. And what you're sharing about exploring your identity through art, not knowing where it was going to come out or which pathway was right for you to express it, but that your identity was going to be shown through your art from a very early age it's so affirming and inspiring. Kids know exactly what is right for them, and it's just really cool. Which leads me to the next question, which might be a little redundant, but I'm hoping you can expand on and make it sound a lot cooler, is how can art teach us about ourselves and our identities? So what you're saying about knowing that acting could be a pathway for this, but like, how does it teach you more about yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think throughout my life, I've used art primarily as an outlet, and I didn't necessarily sit back and allow myself to learn much from it until I got older, because I'm a very logistics based person. I love art and I have to do art, but I'm also doing art because in my mind, I just have to. And this is the most fun, efficient way for me to get my message across. But I think the past couple of years, I've met so many brilliant artists in New York. And I say this every day. I feel like people are probably tired of me saying this, but I truly have some of the most talented people around me. It's a little scary. And I think having that community built around me has allowed me to learn from art in general more, and to just sit back and to take a more relaxed stance and be like, you know what? I actually don't have to do anything. I don't have to make anything today, but I'm getting so many downloads and so much information just because of the people around me, and they're doing shows and they're painting, and it doesn't matter what art form they're doing. I'm constantly inspired by the people around me. So I'm very grateful for that.
I love the idea that you have to do art. It's so essential to your being and who you are as a person that it's not a question as to whether or not that's going to be the focus of your life. It's like you have to, it is. It's just like what your calling is. I think that's really powerful. And definitely, I think I could see how that could also feel overwhelming. And I like the idea of learning to sit back and learn from other people's art and acknowledging that as still an art-based practice, learning from other people's art and experiencing other people's art as still a creative practice, because you're getting inspired by that. That is part of making art, is being inspired by other art. So yeah, I think that's really
Absolutely.
important. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
I guess in connection to that, when you're thinking about the different kinds of art that you make and the different kinds of art that the people you're surrounded by make, and just the different communities that you are a part of, how do you feel that art can start a dialogue between different communities or between people with different values and views?
Oh, absolutely. That's something, I think I was just talking to someone about this very recently. And I was telling them how, while I, of course, didn't choose to be born any of these identities, just the fact that I'm a part of so many groups that sometimes spar and that sometimes think that they're so different. I'm Black and I'm Jewish and I'm trans and I'm queer. And also I grew up in Europe, and so it's a lot going on, and I'm really grateful for that in general, but also really grateful for that because when I make art, if you come to my shows or anything that I really do, there's a lot of intersecting groups there that I don't necessarily always see, just like moving through life, even in New York. So it's not really something I'm necessarily doing actively, but it's something I really value, and I try to talk about it as much as possible because I've seen groups that I am and that I'm not a part of just argue as if there aren't people that are in that intersection, and every group has some intersections. I think that people within those intersections sometimes get forgotten about, and that can amplify these. Sorry, I'm not explaining this the way I'd like to, but I try to keep that as blatant as possible with what I'm doing, and I try to talk about it as much as possible. And I see sometimes people get a little, oh, what? But I am living proof that these communities intersect and cross over, and that the benefits of one group benefit everybody, you know.
I am so curious to jump into this conversation that has approximately like 8,000 different jumping off points, and you can choose wherever to go with it, but about kind of visibility and the way that taking up space can be either used by people in a way that is harmful to us or can be used in a way to encourage other people to be themselves and show up more authentically. And I'm really curious your thoughts around social media and the role that it can play in promoting that visibility and connecting people in a really powerful way, and can also be a force for not great stuff in different ways. And specifically, I was reading your quotes in your, you didn't bring it up, so I'm going to bring it up, New York Times article where you were like placed in this movement of badass fashion designers and androgynous models and androgynous activists, like all this great movement happening around deconstructing gender in New York right now. And I'm just curious, there's a few different points we could go with this. We could talk about social media, talk about visibility in general, visibility and social media, or being a part of this movement that is taking place online during the pandemic, online post-pandemic, and how you feel all of that fits into your branding and your art.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, I forgot about that article, low-key. It's been a few years, but yeah, in quarantine, I made TikTok for the first time, and I didn't anticipate gaining such a platform on that app relatively quickly. And that was off of originally just doing random stuff, but basically exclusively talking about being trans and trans stuff and doing these satirical dude bro, like bro, but like trans, like bro, like you gotta put your binder on type of thing, among other things. So social media is always, I like what I was saying in terms of, I'm a very intentional, strategic, logistical person by nature in terms of getting my message across, not like moving through life. But since I've been on social media, I've been using it as a way to talk about things more and to do it in a way that's more creative, which is why I appreciate TikTok, because before TikTok, I was sharing things on Instagram, but you got to be creative on TikTok. Like people will be like, oh, everybody's blowing up. But if you're not funny, if your video's not good quality or not funny, whatever it is you're trying to go for, it really might not hit. And so I appreciate using TikTok as a way to be creative and to work on my comedic timing, but all with the intention of communicating, look, trans people are humans too. Black people are humans too. Jewish people are humans too. And on the other side of that, though, I think a lot of us are seeing how visibility can really be extremely dangerous. When Pose came out, it changed the game. I love that show. RIP that show. And while I think it did a lot of really good, and I've heard people have discussions that I've never heard happen before among non-trans communities, but trigger warning, the highest year for trans violence in the US was the same year that Pose came out. So while the visibility can create a lot of really good dialogue, and it can help people who are already a little bit open-minded to think more, it can also just make someone who's not open-minded at all just angry. I want to take it out on the nearest trans person, on the nearest whoever. So it's definitely a fine line, and I still think that visibility needs to happen, but it simultaneously needs to happen while more protection is ensured to the community that's gaining visibility. Because otherwise, while I love that show, and the average trans Black woman, trans person in general walking down the street doesn't have the same security, doesn't have bodyguards. Some of the cast members might, I don't know if they do, but It's definitely complex, but I think over the past few years, largely due to social media and the media in general, things have gotten a lot better. Like a lot. Like if you told me pre-pandemic that I built a platform off of talking about something I was hiding for 20 years, I would not be able to conceive that. Or that Pose came out, I would not be able to conceive that. So we're getting somewhere, I think.
I think that's really important to remember. I feel like I was talking about this a lot during Pride. It can be so easy to get caught up in all of the ways that we still need to do work and all of the things that are so bad and all of these reversals of a lot of important legislation that happen. It's just really easy to focus on the liberation work that still remains to be done, but it's equally as important to recognize the strides that have been made. And yeah, that progress that it is there. You're right. Pose as a show absolutely could not have been made even 10 years ago. And so there are these small things that we do need to be like, okay, this thing can exist in a way that it absolutely couldn't have even a few years ago. And so, yes, we still have so much work to do because, like you said, okay, maybe, yes, we've made progress that there's visibility, but people are still experiencing violence because of that visibility. So of course there's more to be done, but at least we're starting to move towards a place where visibility is the norm and people can go on TikTok or on other social media platforms and see representations of themselves or representations of the person that they want to be when they feel safe enough to be that person or are safe enough to be that person. It is just so hard because social media is so two-sided in that way, and we see that as very vocal anti-Zionist Jews whose platform is entirely online, and obviously you see that on your platform like you talked about, but at the same time I'm thinking of young people who have access to these platforms who are learning things and seeing things that they would not have access to otherwise. Like if not for young people being on TikTok, as much as sometimes I'm like, maybe not yet, like there's so much to learn. There is really so much to learn if the platform is leveraged in a way that makes sense and feels good. And we've talked about this in previous episodes, the need to acknowledge joy and the need to acknowledge the little strides that we're making, even though we know there's so much more to be done. That's just super real. I guess in the vein of that, because we're talking about strides towards liberation and the ways that we can use social media to promote visibility and therefore I think promote liberation in a lot of ways. What do you think about the idea of art as resistance? And do you think that your art is a form of resistance?
I think in terms of my art, I do see it that way. Everything I do is for everyone, but also very intentionally for a specific community. I try to keep it that way. And I do see it as resistance. It's interesting. Not that I try not to think about it too heavily, because it's like a fine line for me, because I worry that if I think about it too dramatically, I'm gonna start thinking, yo, I am saving the earth right now with this song. So I try not to get too carried away, but I also actively remind myself that this, if it's helping one person, it's doing something. And I've had people specifically on TikTok for the most part be like, yo, I don't know anybody like me in my town. I don't know anybody like me at school. I don't know anybody. So thank you for these videos. And I don't necessarily see my TikToks as like part of my art per se, but it's just in terms of impact. I think if the impact is there, which it basically always is, as long as we're connecting with at least one person, then it is a form of resistance. And I know that there are people in this country, on this planet, who would really hate to find out what I be talking about and what I do and the meaning behind my music and my art and everything. And I know that there are systemic forces set in place in this country to try to prevent discussions like these happening and to try to prevent the creation of art that's similar to what I make. So in that way, yeah, actually, you know, my ancestors fought for this and now I can do it seemingly freely for the most part, knock on wood. And that is resistance. And then speaking to joy too, that's something that I've really been thinking about a lot the past couple of years, because I feel like for most of my life I was a hyper realist. In the past 5 years or so I've gotten to be really optimistic, but I think that focusing on joy and Black joy and trans joy and everything joy has really changed my life for the better. And I'm still realistic in a way. I'm still very much like, okay, there's work to be done, but fostering these communities that I have that are filled with Black and brown, cutie pock people has really changed the game for me, because I think growing up I felt so alone in so many ways. So now it's, oh no, I'm actually filled, I'm like surrounded by brilliant people who look like me, who don't look like me, who teach me new things every day, and who foster so much joy. And that joy is really healing. And I also think that there's not enough joy shown. That's why Pose is also really dope, because it showed, yes, it showed the struggles, but it showed Black trans people laughing and just being happy and falling in love and hugging each other. That I've never seen in my life, ever, through a Black lens. More like just showing more Black joy and more queer joy and just more joy in general, especially of marginalized people, can really do some serious healing in a way that you might not even notice at first. Because I didn't really realize that until it was happening. And I was like, wow, I was crying with every episode. I was like, what? I was like, what is going on? Whoa. So yeah, joy is something I want to foster more, and expand on in my life and within the identities that I'm a part of.
Wow. I love that, because that's resistance, right? The Black queer joy being centered and that being the narrative is resistance against the narratives that, as you said, the hateful people across the country want to promote. So absolutely, I love that. Joy as resistance is definitely an answer to that question. And I kind of want to bring us through that joy and how that shows up in your creative process, because you have two very different avenues through which you can direct your creative vision. And I am so curious, with people who are multi-talented in many different directions, how do you decide what shows up in the fashion, and how do you decide what shows up in your music? And does it diverge, or is it really aligned sometimes? Does it represent different parts of yourself? I'm so curious to hear about your creativity.
For fashion, I thought of this brand a few years ago, casually. I was like, oh, that'd be cool to do it on the 27th. One day when I just randomly feel like it. And I ended up starting it way sooner in November. And it's interesting in terms of, I've always loved fashion. My mom's a fashion designer. So there's mannequins in my house, very convenient for me. And I was a model for 5 years. I still model when I feel like it, but I've been in fashion for a long time, but I've never really been an arts and crafts person. I never really worked with my hands before. So it's brought me a lot of joy to just make things in that way, in a way that I've never really tapped into before. I was very intimidated, but it's been fun. It just launched on Juneteenth. But the most satisfying moment thus far, even from the photo shoot, has been just putting the plates on people and see them look down at their chest in that way. I cry happy tears very easily. I'll cry at a dog commercial. So I'd be on set like, okay, cool, I'm gonna get some water. That has been really satisfying, because that's what it's for. And I take a lot of inspiration from Iris Van Herpen, and I have a whole song about her, and just really avant-garde artists who push the boundaries of what's happening right now. I think that's where I get the most joy, is in terms of fashion, is seeing the people, specifically the trans people's faces, light up in that way, because I think that there has been some gender affirming fashion over the past few years, but a lot of it's very utilitarian. It's not necessarily avant-garde and dramatic in the way that McQueen has been. It's usually more, okay, here's your binder and this is to help you. That's it. I try to keep beyond as dramatic and as different as possible, because trans people deserve joy, period, but also deserve to be high fashion in that way and to participate in pushing the boundary in that way. Shout out Mugler, shout out Iris Van Herpen, shout out McQueen. So much inspo. And in terms of music, I think I started music literally like a month before the pandemic started. I did one show the weekend before lockdown in New York. But I've been singing and writing and rapping since I was a kid, just for funsies. And I do see music as more, okay, this is my treat for myself. Like, beyond is also, fashion is also my treat for myself, but music is truly, it's really for me. And if other people resonate with that, I love that, and that's beautiful. And I appreciate the people that enjoy my music. But when I'm writing, it's like, I gotta get something off my chest, whether I'm happy or sad or whatever it is. So that brings me joy in that way. In the way of, I think music is currently my main personal outlet for whatever I'm going through. But Beyond's too, but Beyond's more I'm like, okay, this is for the people. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, I feel like it absolutely does. I don't know, I love the idea of queer and trans people specifically being deserving of like avant-garde fashion in a way that is centering their transness, not just a trans person walking in an avant-garde show, but specifically the avant-garde nature of the fashion, highlighting someone's trans identity. I think is really cool and really powerful. And it's, I don't know, it's just very cool to hear you talk about that and gives me a deeper understanding of the brand in general. That just makes me really excited about that. I really love that as a mission and an objective of the work. And is, yeah, just such a clear representation of resistance and using that as resistance. I think that's really amazing.
thank you.
I guess one of the final questions before we start to close out is, do you feel like there are any Jewish themes that show up in your art, whether explicitly or not explicitly? So whether it's how your Judaism has influenced your art or if there are specific themes.
Yeah, it's so interesting. For the past year or so, I've been working on trying different types of singing because I've been singing since I could talk. I've always loved to sing, but I've had a very estranged relationship with singing for the past few years where I was like, I'm not really singing anymore. And when I did, I was not really happy with it. And it was a whole thing. But I'm getting back to a place of loving to sing. And that's a big part of that is because I've been studying just different scales, and I've been studying a lot of Arabic scales, and I've been listening to just a lot of traditional Jewish music. I've been listening to a lot of traditional Middle Eastern music, a lot of traditional South Asian music. I've just really been expanding because I already listen to a very wide variety of music, but I've been listening to it like strategically with taking notes type shit. And so I did make a song on my last album where it either starts or I think it ends with me singing a prayer, not fully. I'm teasing it because I didn't want to fully tap into that in that song. It's not really like a religious song per se, but I try to tease it to tease. I don't know. I try to bring it in at least in little bits. I've had a couple songs where I'm fully like singing in Hebrew, and my Hebrew is not the best, but I've tried to incorporate it because if nothing else, it sounds gorgeous. I love Jewish music, and it has been a big part of me, and it's something that I don't necessarily talk about verbally in my music too much. I don't really have lyrics necessarily that are like, I'm Jewish, but so I try to make up for that. That should, honestly, but I try to make up for that by incorporating some of the traditional hymns and the traditional ways of singing. And it's so advanced too. So it's been a fun challenge for me to listen to. What is her name? I'm listening to so much. I'm so bad with names in general. It's like a problem. But the woman who sings in the Prince of Egypt movie, she sings like she is like the voice of the mother. If you've seen that movie, watch Prince of Egypt again, everybody. Watch it again. But she's a Yemeni, I believe she's a Yemeni Jewish woman, and she sings the river. Oh God, I'm like blanking on everything. But the song when she's putting him into the river, that beautiful song. Her discography is impeccable, and it's cool to listen to just like a Yemeni Jewish woman just kill it. Her vocals are like, I don't know if I'll get there right now, but it's been really helpful in, yes, musically, but also just personally. It's been really fun because I don't know, the past year or so have been trying to not double down, but trying to really tap in with knowing the scriptures and knowing more things religiously, because I don't get into this, but there was a random woman on TikTok that tried to start a smear campaign about me and accuse me of being a BHI, which is like a black extremist group. I bring that up because that situation helped highlight to me that I need to know more about the certain religious aspects, because in trying to defend myself, it's some of the points I don't even know, like I don't know enough. I'm Jewish, so it's been a big mission for me the past year to really have it all together and to know the facts and to know more Hebrew. And I want to have abundance for one day where we get drunk and stuff because we're older. But
yeah, I like the idea. We talked about this with our last guest, Aviva, just accessing different parts of Judaism through Jewish music and musicality. And I think that's a really cool way to connect with Jewish culture in a way that isn't just simply going to synagogue or being explicit about Judaism in your artwork. Yeah, I think it's a really cool way to engage with Judaism because I don't know, I've always felt like music was such a big part of the Jewish experience for me because obviously Jesse and I grew up Reform and music is huge in Reform synagogues. But yeah, that's just super exciting and I'm excited to hear where you go with that.
I think we all who are publicly Jewish online struggle with like other people defining our Jewishness for us and telling us what type of Jew we should be or how Jewish we should be or what our Judaism means to us based on our online presence. So while absolutely there's a lot that is probably leveled against you as a Black Jew publicly on TikTok and Instagram in a way that Alana and I have not dealt with at all, we also have experienced people being like, oh, so you're not really Jewish. Cool. Oh, you're Jewish, or you're not Jewish enough to be accepted in my version of Judaism. So just wanted to name that as a real struggle, being publicly Jewish and taking political stances or just expressing yourself online.
Yeah, I'm glad you called that in, Jesse, because I was just about to call that in. And just, yeah, naming that, obviously learning more about the religious aspects of Judaism is awesome. If that's something that calls to you, none of us need to prove our Judaism to anyone because we don't fit into their version of what Judaism is supposed to look like. And yeah, I think that's important. And I hope that you have Jewish community. It sounds like you do. That makes you feel seen and held and affirmed in your Jewishness.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, as we begin wrapping up, to try to bring us from all these ideas into one, which is impossible, but if you could leave all of our listeners with one message, what would it be?
One message. I would just say that whoever you are and whatever you're doing is completely valid, and echoing what we just said, you don't have to prove yourself or do it for anybody else but yourself, and that liberation also lies in just existing and doing your thing as a whatever person you are. That is liberation, and that'll make your ancestors smile truly, because a lot of our ancestors didn't have that freedom. Not to be so like literal with it, but even if they did, I think it's restorative justice to just be able to exist and do you and do whatever it is that you want to do freely, and to use all the freedom that you have, for sure, and to fight for others. Add that to your schedule too.
Yes, I really love, yeah, that's such a good message to end us on. I love the idea that liberation lies in existing, and I think that's really beautiful. So thank you for that sentiment, and thank you for all of the other sentiments that you've shared during our time together. It's been so wonderful getting to talk to you and hear about your artistic practice and all the things that inspire you, and it's just been so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. I've had a wonderful time.
Before we close out, we're curious if there's any work that you want to highlight for folks. I guess 2 questions to guide that are: where can people access Beyond, your clothing brand, and where should people listen to your music? And then if there's anything else you want to highlight, now's the time.
Thank you. Yeah. Check out Beyond Studios. That's at Beyond, just the dictionary spellings, beyondstudios.nyc on Instagram. I just launched appointments open. You can get it custom with your measurements, or you can get it bespoke with a mold of your chest so it fits you perfectly, every inch. Handmade, good materials by second generation New Yorker. Tap in. And you can find my music everywhere under the name ZAI, ZAI. I recommend typing in The Purge featuring Big Water, because I've heard that pops up quicker than my name. So The Purge featuring Big Water, my #1 song. Type that in to find my music. And follow me on Instagram, KXNGZAIRE. I thought I was going to get deleted today. I think it was a scammer telling me my account was about to. I was like, oh my God, if I get deleted before I go on the podcast, are you kidding me? The day of. So follow my Instagram. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been really great. And yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Everyone, we'll be back next week with another incredible artist, Parker Sarah. Parker is a queer Ashkenazic actor, poet, theater maker, and teaching artist from the Upper Midwest. So we'll see y'all back here next week this time. Thanks again, Zai. So good to talk to you.
So great talking to you. Please send me the link. I'm going to blast it everywhere. Folks, thank you so much.